Let's talk about AI hallucinations. If you've ever used AI and it gave you a completely reasonable sounding answer very confidently, and it turned out to be absolutely false or wrong, you might have been dealing with a hallucination. And it's interesting when we run into these, you think something that's apparently so good and so advanced, how could it possibly make a mistake like this? How could it have a bug like this? Except it's not necessarily that. Hallucinations are just an expected consequence because of how these systems actually generate language and how they're trained behind the scenes. So, to simply define it, a hallucination is basically when a model presents false information presented accurately. And again, this is not a typo, it's not a crash. It reads like any other response from the LLM, but it's just simply wrong. It could be a citation to a paper that doesn't exist, a statistic that was never actually published, or a quote that was attributed to someone that never said it. And this is turning out to be actually a pretty big problem. So NeurIPS is one of the most competitive AI research conferences in the world. And in late 2025, there was about 100 fabricated citations across 53 of the papers that were accepted to that conference. So this is not just the common user that falls prey to this, it's even these researchers that can. And that's why you need to be very careful when you're using AI, especially for things that have consequences for your job, for decision making. It's always important to do your own homework and confirm that the things it's telling you, especially when it comes down to facts and numbers, that they're actually true. Now remember, when it hallucinates, it's not lying to you, it's just predicting what it thinks is going to come next because of how it was trained. Because lying, the way we think about it as humans, that requires knowing what the truth is and then deliberately choosing to say something else. But that's not what's happening here. If you go back to our previous episode on how large language models are trained, you'll remember that they don't store facts the way a database does. It learns statistical patterns from a lot of data and text and various sources. And again, what's the job of the LLM? All it does is it generates the response one token at a time by predicting what the next most probable token is going to be based on what came before it. Remember, it's just predicting. It's not thinking the way we think. So it just comes down to the training of that LLM. Most of the time, or a lot of the time, it's going to give you a good, accurate answer because most of the commonly discussed things are going to appear in the training set that it was trained on. But when you're researching in a gap, there's an obscure topic, a very specific date, or an exact statistic that maybe it didn't train on or was very scantily trained on, it still has to produce something. It has to give you an answer. So it's going to try to predict that next token, but it's making that prediction on way less data than it has on other things that it gives you an accurate answer about. So remember, when you're using any AI, fluency does not mean factuality. Just because it looks good and it sounds serious and professional, the actual information and data it's giving you could be complete garbage. So be very careful. And you have to keep in mind when these AIs are trained and the benchmarks that evaluate them, the reason it's answering even though it's wrong, it's because you can think of it like a multiple choice exam during school. If you left a question blank, you weren't going to get any points. And obviously a wrong answer is going to get you 0 points, but guessing at it at least gives you a chance of getting the right answer. So when they measured these AI LLMs against the benchmarks, producing some kind of answer scored better than declining to answer at all, while just leaving it blank or saying it doesn't know was not rewarded. So just like humans, whatever the AI is rewarded for, it's going to do more of when it trains. So across the millions of training examples that it's trained on, that's going to create this unseen incentive structure where generating any kind of answer is going to be more beneficial than refusing to answer at all. So just keep in mind, it's not like a personable relationship. The model isn't trying to deceive you. It's just responding to its own training set and how it was taught to generate answers. The more newer models, they become better at expressing uncertainty and letting you know that they're not sure just because of the improvements in this training, but it still does happen. Now, the next natural question is, well, why can't we just train away these hallucinations entirely? And the reason for that is because there's a difference between checking whether an answer is correct or generating the correct answer from scratch. If I hand an LLM a claimed fact, it's much easier to just check and recognize if it looks right or wrong. But generating that same fact correctly when I ask a question rather than being shown it first, that's much harder because there's unlimited ways almost to be wrong, but there's only one correct answer. So that means even a model that's really good at recognizing incorrect information, that doesn't necessarily mean it's really good at always generating the correct answer in the first place. And this is a problem that these frontier labs are working on, but that's the difficulty with just completely getting rid of these hallucinations. So you are always the final check. Now, there's many types too. There's things like fabricated hallucinations where it'll just straight up make up a statistic or a date or an event or claims that sound specific and believable but were never true. Or fabricated sources like citations, paper titles, articles, or quotes attributed to certain people that never actually existed or wasn't their quote. This just happened to me the other day. There's that great quote that I love. There's no peace for a man who has seen what he can become. And it misattributed it to some philosopher, and there was no actual evidence that that quote actually belonged to that philosopher. And then there's also reasoning errors. So that's when a model produces a chain of reasoning that's going to lead to a conclusion that doesn't actually follow. So the logic it's following to go from A to B to C, the assumptions it's making, it doesn't actually make any sense the way we would make those assumptions. And then the one that's usually hardest to catch is misremembered specifics. So it'll get the overall answer correct or the explanation, but one small detail or exact number or date might be wrong, and that might be a tough error to catch. So again, if you're using this for, publishing information somewhere, presenting it to people, you have to be very careful and do your due diligence. So again, this is not to scare you. It's not to say that AI is broadly bad or untrustworthy. It's generally very good. It's just remember that fluency and factuality are not the same thing. And ultimately, if you're using a tool, it's your responsibility to discern how to use it and make sure that you're using the correct information. So do your due diligence, especially when it's something highly specific, an important statistic that you need, a school presentation, or for your work, a medical recommendation. Treat it as a claim that you need to verify rather than a fact that you just accept wholesale, especially when there's high stakes involved for you. And ask the model follow-up questions like, don't be, yo, dog, are you hallucinating? Not like that. But you can ask it, hey, where did this information come from? Cite your source. And then you can go check if that source actually exists. And you also have control through the prompts, and we'll talk about prompt engineering in probably one of our next lessons, but you can also tell it that, hey, I'm asking you this question, but I only want you to use these vetted sources to produce the answer. And that kind of limits its ability or the likelihood that it's just going to make something up. Even better if you're presenting it with a PDF or a direct document that you want it to use as a source rather than researching the internet. And the thing that we'll leave you with, and this idea keeps coming up and it's going to keep coming up, is to remember that that LLM is just a token predictor. And when you think of it this way, it kind of takes it off the pedestal of thinking that AI can do no wrong and it's this extremely complex, high-level technology. It's amazing. It's going to get even better, but ultimately, that's all it is. It's going to get better and the hallucinations are going to be less and less, but for now, it is a serious thing. And now we understand why it happens. So hopefully that was helpful for you guys. Be sure to check out the community and the resources in the description. Some cool things coming there. Let us know what you want to hear about next, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.